Hi, so I've had a whole lot of people ask me about some help and tips on working with mockups. And for those of you that don't know, a mockup is basically a digital recreation of a product photo. They're really helpful so you don't actually have to make every single design that you want to offer to people or to just show them an example of what it might look like. So this is a blank mockup. This is one that I sell on my website. And so I wanted to start with this mainly because the request is specifically for a mug in Photoshop, but mugs and cups and stuff are pretty common where people wonder how to get the curve and stuff to match. So we're going to start with the mug, and I was going to show you a few other common mock-ups as well. But the first thing you want to do, we're using Photoshop for this tutorial. I just finished doing one for Silhouette Studio, so if you don't have Photoshop and you have Studio, you can go and check my channel for that video. But in Photoshop, this is how we do it. And I love Photoshop. I use Photoshop for all my mockups, so I'm very comfortable with this. First thing you want to do is open up the file. You could take your own mock-up photos, or you could purchase them online, or I give away free mock-ups every week on debbiedoesdesignco.com. So there's lots of places you can get them, but you want to open up the mock-up in Photoshop. I usually recommend that you save a copy of it so you don't mess up your original in case you goof something up. And then you want to pull in the design. So I already have a design in mind for this one, and so I'm going to go and show you how to bring in the design. The cool thing with Photoshop is you don't have to only use images. You could pull in SVG files too. So if you're doing something with vinyl, you could pull up the SVG file that you're using without having to go create a new image to drop over it. But as far as images go, you want a PNG file, preferably with a transparent background. Now, if you only have a JPEG and you have Photoshop, you can go and remove the background, but it's better to just start with a nice clean one with no background. So here's how I do my mockups. You come over here and you go to File, and you go Place Linked. Then you can navigate to the design that you want. Ooh, it was right there. Love is Blind Eye. This is the design that I want to use. So I'm going to grab the PNG file of the design, and then you just hit place, and it drops it right in here for you. So I usually just start kind of resizing it right away, getting it to the basic size that you want it. The important thing with a mock-up is this is going to be a digital representation of the product that you're trying to sell. So make sure that you make it as accurate as possible so that the customer doesn't have any surprises like, wait, the design was way bigger in the mock-up, or it looked a little bit more faded or whatever. You want to try to get it to match the finished product as closely as possible so you don't have issues with false advertising and all of that. So Photoshop is great for that because you have so many options on making it look real. And I think that I need to do a video on some advanced techniques with mockups because there's some crazy things you could do. But I'm going to try to go over the basics without making this too long-winded, and I know that I can do that, but I try to get as much information in there as possible. So with that being said, we're trying to make it accurate. Depending on your mug press, if this was a 15-ounce mug, I would make sure I had a lot of space between the top and the bottom because my mug press does not like it if the design is too close to the edge. Same thing goes side to side. If you have like a circle design, you want to make sure you don't make it too big, because if your mug press, or if you're using an oven or however you're doing it, if you have some issues with the design being too close to the handle, and you've got the design huge in the mock-up, but if you make it that big in real life and it gets too close to the handle and it won't press right, then you're going to have an issue there. So make sure that you're making it as accurate as possible. But this is good. This is a good size right here. So I'm going to leave it like this. You hit the little check box. You'll see in Photoshop you've got the background and the layer with your design. So the thing you want to do here is the curve of the mug. A lot of people we'll just drop it over and leave it like that. And I mean, it's not awful, and some designs are worse than others, but it's kind of a dead giveaway to me. And the whole point is to make it so people don't know. You know, you want it to look real. So having this straight edge there, and that's why I chose this design, is because it's got a straight font across the bottom. You know, that's not how you want it to be. So make sure you're selecting your layer with the design, and we're going to go up to Edit and Transform. Ooh, go back up there, and Warp. And it gives you this grid thing here. And if you watch the silhouette video, this part is all very similar. So you just grab these little arms and you pull this down, and you want to make the edge of your grid, the curve of it, match the curve of the mug. You can kind of tinker with it and click off of it and see what looks right. The top of this really doesn't matter that much because there is no straight line there to be a dead giveaway, but I like to go ahead and do it anyway. It just makes me feel like I'm adjusting it the way that it will end up being. And then you hit the little check mark, and then it saves those changes for you. And there, you're good. Especially with the mug and sublimation, like that's pretty much exactly how it's going to turn out. Unless you have some issues with your print settings or your time and temp, the mugs are very, very accurate. And I actually love using them as mock-ups for my designs because it doesn't take away from the design at all. One thing to note, you want to make sure that your design doesn't have any white in it in case the mug mock-up that you're using isn't perfectly white. So I try to make all of my mug mock-ups, I up the contrast and edit them a little bit so that the mug is about as true white as possible, so it's not an issue. But if you do have something, like let's say this design, the white of the eye was actually white, which is very common. If you moved it over, you would see if this one had white right there, sometimes the mug that you've got it on, the white shows, and you don't want that. So if you're using Photoshop, luckily that can be a pretty easy fix. So you would come over here to your panel on the left, you go to the eraser, and if you hold it down, you can get the background eraser tool. And the background eraser tool takes a little bit of practice. You can have it be contiguous, which means it's touching, or discontiguous. So like let's say there's a white here and white here, and you clicked right here, it won't erase the white out there if it's contiguous. But if you have it the discontiguous, then it'll erase both, basically, if there's something breaking them apart. So it just kind of depends on what you're doing, and the tolerance will affect the outcome too. So you have to kind of tweak those. But if you used a linked design, like I just did the file place linked, see how I have the little circle with the line through it? It doesn't want to mess with it because it's not actually in the file. But if you need to mess with it, if you click on it, it'll pop up and say, this object must be rasterized before proceeding. You could just hit OK, and then it'll let you do that. And you can go in, and if that was white, you click there. I mean, it might be helpful if you unlocked the background and just hid the background for a second, and you can really see what the white is. Like technically I've got some white down here. I mean, I could show you. There's a little bit of white in the distressing of this. So if I hit the little eraser tool, see how it makes a little grid there? We're erasing that white. So depending on the mug and the design you're using, if you need to erase some of that white out, that is a way to do it. There's another trick. If your background is nice and white, you can come over here and select the layer with your design and choose one of these blending options. Multiply works well. If you choose multiply, a lot of times that will hide the white too. So you have a couple of different options. It just depends on how obvious the white is and if it's going somewhere on your object where it's just not cooperating. Hitting multiply will usually make that white drop out too, which, see if I pull that, I didn't erase all the white in blind, but you could see that it's not showing up now. So it just kind of depends on what you're doing, what you prefer. There's a lot of things you could do in a lot of different ways in Photoshop. But for mugs, you really don't even have to mess with the blending. It just helps if you want a really quick and easy way to make the white not show up. Now, what I wanted to do real quick was show you the same concept, but with a shirt. Okay, so I realized that the design that I was doing there is not what I wanted to show either. I'm trying to find one that doesn't have any transparency. So we're going to do this one. Yes, this one's perfect. So if you look at this design, you cannot see the fabric of the shirt through the design. There's no transparency to it at all. And if you were doing vinyl, that would be fine. But if you're doing sublimation, you need it to look accurate to how it will actually look, and that is just not right. So get it placed how you want it. And this is why Photoshop works so well, is you need to change the blending option for something that's not a white shirt. Otherwise, it doesn't show the fibers of the shirt through the design. So come over here to your layer and choose multiply and see how that changed it. This is why I always use Photoshop, because that is the only way to make it look accurate. Now, technically this shirt is 91% polyester. And so what I would do on top of that is the opacity. I would change it to 91. And that's going to be a pretty accurate representation of what that shirt will look like. If you're using a shirt that's only 65% poly, I realize that looks super faded, but after it gets washed, chances are that is what it'll look like. Now, I probably wouldn't go that dramatic. I'd probably do it around there, 79%. Because really, I mean, it just kind of depends on the shirt itself. And hopefully you've actually made one before you're posting pictures for sale, and you have a better idea for what it'll look like when it's done. Now this shirt, it subs really well. This is a Bella and Canvas marble tee. I don't remember what they call it, but I'll make sure to share links. So the 91%, that's good. I mean, that looks pretty accurate to me, and you could see the fibers of the shirt through it. Now, if you're using a shirt that's really scrunched on the edges and you needed to kind of warp the design around that, you could do the same thing we did with the mug, and you go up and open up the transform panel and warp it to kind of curve around the shirt or whatever, if you need to. Okay, so I wanted to show you how to do a sign real quick, because there's a little bit of a different warp that works well for things that are still flat but just at an angle. So I'm going to grab this design just because it's got a nice flat edge to it to make it easier to see what we're doing. So if you just drop it over, you know, that doesn't look right. The perspective is not matching the picture. You know, you need it to be at an angle. So same concept, but we're just going to choose a different transform. We're going to come over here and we're going to go to perspective. And what's cool about this one is you can literally just drag it. And what I like to look for is the top line and the bottom line lining up with the top line and the bottom line of the frame. And actually we have a little bit of a discrepancy here on the right to left, so I probably should have rotated it just a little bit. And we could still do that. We just rotate just a little bit. And then you can go back, go to perspective, and just make sure that your lines line up, and that looks pretty good to me. Then you just center it on the sign. Now this one's goofy, you probably wouldn't ever put that design on that frame, but just for an example, that's how you would do something on a flat object. Same concept could work with cutting boards or trays or you know, whatever. But I just wanted to show you the perspective warp works really well for that one. Okay, so the last thing that I wanted to cover here was how to do smart objects. And I went through all of the basics here on how to do it. But the only issue there is that every time you want to do a different design, you've got to replace it on there all over again to make it fit. And if you use smart objects, you place it once and you can keep updating the design and it just automatically lays on there perfectly. So every single mock-up that I do, I go straight to the smart object step, because then it's set up for future ones and you don't have to keep doing it every single time. But if you don't want to mess with it and you're not doing that many mock-ups, you could stop watching here. You really don't have to worry about this extra step. But it's just really, really handy to have, especially if you're already using Photoshop. You might as well take advantage of it. So this, for example, I'm just going to go ahead and delete this, and I'm going to show you how to do it in a different way. So instead of going up here and going to File, Link, and browsing to your design, we're going to set up a smart object. So we make a new layer. We come over here to your little selection box and make a box approximately the size of where you want your design to be. You can move it around later, but the closer you have it, the easier it makes it for you in future steps. So make a box here, make sure you're on a new layer, and go Edit, Fill, and just fill it with a color. Doesn't matter what color. And then you have a little white box over it. If you come over here to the layer, so you have to fill it, because if it's empty, it doesn't know what to do, and you don't want it to actually be a shape. It won't read it right for some reason. So you just have to have a fill box here. Right click and hit Convert to Smart Object. And now there's a little icon that changes. If you double click on that, it opens in a new file. So we were just over here on this dark framed sign. There's a new file open over here. This is where you're going to store all of your designs. So just to make life easier for formatting it on the main file, I like to keep the background white because it helps you know where your box is, and go back to the steps we did before. We go to File, Place Linked, grab a design, place it approximately where you would put it on said sign, hit the check mark so it leaves it there, and then you hit Save. So you go File, Save, or Control S on your keyboard. You save this, and then it updates your smart object for your main one. So now we want to go through and do the formatting where we warp it to match, but you only have to do it once. So I'm going to go and hit Deselect, and then it gives you the little movement things here. So this is where you can rotate it or do whatever changes you need to do, just like we did in previous steps, to make it blend in with the background. So it's actually pretty helpful to decrease the opacity just a little bit so you could see what you're working with. So now I'm going to go up here and go to Edit, Transform. We're going to go to Perspective like we did before. I'm just going to grab these corners. Signs are actually really easy. I can make sign mock-ups all day long because they're nice and flat. But I want to get out of that because it's just a little bit big. You can see it sticking off the side there. So we're going to make it just a little bit smaller. And just get it to fit nicely there. Now if you want to go all the way to the edge, you could do that, but really you don't need to unless your design is really going to get that close. The only issue is if you wanted to actually pull it up there. Don't do that. Sometimes it kind of warps it, so you really need to go resize it. But for the most part, they're pretty minimal changes. But you just mess around with the warp panel to get it how you want it. And then if you double click on this, it'll open it up. We already have it open, it's just up here. I'm going to erase the background and then hit Save again. Then we go back, correct your opacity because you don't need it to be faded anymore. And it's already set up for you exactly how you need it. Now, the cool thing and why I like smart objects is you can come in here, hide this design, file, place linked, grab a different design, hit the little check mark so it drops it, hit save or Control S on your keyboard, go back, and it's already dropped in there exactly how you want it. So the smart objects, if you're willing to make those few extra steps, they are totally worth it. Then you just save the Photoshop document. Don't save it as a JPEG. Make sure you save it as a Photoshop document so it saves all of the stuff in there. And then it's already set up for you to just drop in designs whenever you need them. Just make sure that when you're saving the actual finished one, I would normally drop a watermark or something, but you save it as a JPEG in a new file so you don't mess with your original Photoshop document, if that makes sense. So anyway, I just wanted to show you smart objects. Now, keep in mind if you're doing something with you know, a fabric shirt or something like we did on one of the other ones, you could change the blending options right on your smart object. So if this was something over a shirt or where you want the texture to show through, you've got the right blending option already chosen. So you won't even have to think through the blending options and opacity and all that stuff again. The smart object will just remember it for future ones as soon as you set it up once. So anyway, oh, and I almost forgot. So when you have your other layer here with your smart object on here, you save it every time you make the changes in this other document that it opens up. When you're all done, you just go ahead and close that and make sure you save it and you close it, and then you can save. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save as. I'm just going to put this on the desktop and make sure you save it as a Photoshop document like I already said. Ignore that. When you open it up again, you don't have to go and try to find that smart object. It's embedded in the file. So you'll see it just like this. If you double click on it, it opens it up again in a new window. So you don't need to worry about where you're saving this or keeping track of it. It's embedded into the document for you. So you just close it and open it however you need to. It's saved with the main file. So when I go to save the finished one, the JPEG, I go save as, and I would say JPEG, and it automatically checks save as copy, give it a new name and save it. So I'll go test, save. It doesn't change your main document that you're working on because of that save as copy. So you just want to make sure that you save a JPEG version, come back in, and if you made any changes to it, save it again so it's saved for future reference. But you don't have to keep track of that smart object as long as you saved the Photoshop document in the way you want it for future use, if that makes sense. I know that's kind of a confusing extra step, but it's totally worth it if you're willing to figure it out and kind of see how those smart objects work. And they just make life so much easier. So anyway, if I missed something, let me know. Thanks for watching, guys. Oh, and any of these designs and mock-ups are all available on my website. And not all of them have smart objects. I try to add them when I can, but sometimes I don't get smart objects set up for everything. So I do say in the title of the product, if it has a smart object there, if it's got a Photoshop document already set up like this, it'll be right in the title of the listing, so you don't have to set it up. But you can go and set up your own smart objects on any of them now because I just showed you. Anyway, let me know if I missed anything. Thanks for watching, guys.